Well, let me tell you something, folks. On January 24th, 1984, Hulkamania arrived, and the World Wrestling Federation and professional wrestling would never be the same again. Vince McMahon pounced on Verne Gagne's blown opportunity to take Hulk Hogan and make him the centerpiece of his wrestling enterprise and take professional wrestling up to astronomical heights, and Hulk Hogan would reign supreme as the World Wrestling Federation champion, defeating the Iron Sheik on January 23rd, 1984, and holding the championship for just over 4 years. A big goddamn deal. He would turn back all challengers, and he would beat Andre the Giant in front of 93,173 people in the Silverdome, and would make sure to cement himself as the greatest of all time, arguably the greatest of all time. Hulk Hogan, even for all his faults now and all the lies that he continues to tell for some goddamn reason, all the fanciful tales that he doesn't need to tell because he's lived a hell of a goddamn life in and out of the ring, Hulk Hogan was the main reason why Vince McMahon was able to take over the professional wrestling world. Even though there was a colorful cast of tremendous talents, Savage would come along, Piper would come along, and others. And just a lot of great talents have come through that goddamn company. Hulk Hogan and Vince McMahon's vision, twin powers activating to send professional wrestling up to heights it had never seen before and wouldn't see for quite a goddamn while. It's a time we can never go back to. And Verne Gagne fucked it all up because the American Wrestling Association could have had it all. He could have had it all! And he didn't. Because Verne Gagne was a fucking idiot. Rest in peace, Verne, you fucking moron. I'm John Redland with my real honest thoughts on the birth of Hulkamania in the WWF in 1984. So let me know your thoughts on this time period in the comments, please. I'm going to talk about some of the history as far as the key components. And I have done, deep dives as far as the AWA Super Sunday event where Hulk Hogan should have beaten Nick Bockwinkel for the AWA World Heavyweight Championship. And yeah, Hogan had the lucrative deal with New Japan, and AWA had a working relationship with All Japan, and Verne kept a lot of Hogan's merch money while on a tour of Japan. And sure, you could argue that Hogan working All Japan and New Japan would have been cool, but he would have been giving up a lot of money and all that, and Verne Gagne just wasn't willing to admit that Hogan could have been the guy. Now, I don't know if Hogan, and I did a what if about this, you can check it out. If Hogan had not left the AWA, Vince McMahon would have continued to expand. It just wouldn't have happened as fast and wouldn't have happened as lucrative had he not been able to have Hogan. Could have gone with Slaughter, could have gone with various people, and it would have been big, but it wouldn't have been as big with Hogan because it was a perfect storm. And Hogan, lucked into a lot of this shit as well. All the pieces fell together in Vince McMahon's lap, basically, for him to become the guy to promote professional wrestling on a worldwide global stage, universal stage, as it were, to the masses. And even though Crockett would do very well for himself, and people would remember Crockett's shows a lot more fondly, there's a lot of stuff in the WWF that just is really, really fascinating to dive into. And, Hogan, the way he left the AWA, I don't necessarily blame him because Verne Gagne was a full-on dick and didn't treat wrestlers right, and that's been told by a lot of goddamn people. And Vince McMahon wanted everybody to basically give their nose. Bobby Heenan was the only one that honored his commitments because Bobby Heenan was very good like that. And rest in peace, Bobby Heenan, the best wrestling manager, the best color commentator, him and Gorilla Monsoon, the best duo to ever do it. But this is about Hulk Hogan and all the stuff that came up, to lead to Hulk Hogan becoming the champion. So, let's start back all the way at the Shea Stadium event in August of 1980. Now, this is a big, pivotal event because you had Hogan and Andre, you had Bruno and Zbyszko, and you had a good card. Take a look. Go research it. Go Google it, kiddos, and figure out why this card was such a big deal. Because Bruno and Zbyszko was the feud in 1980. A big goddamn feud. This was great shit. I really, really enjoy looking back at this period and just seeing the protege beating up the legend. And Bruno basically, this is pretty much his last hurrah as far as a big main event program. I mean, he would wrestle even into early 87. I mean, he would wrestle off and on. He wrestled Randy Savage just before WrestleMania 3. He only had one WrestleMania appearance, though. That was in the Battle Royal in Chicago. But considering that Bruno had been wrestling for nigh on almost 30 fucking years by that point, with breaks, it's still amazing just to think about what Bruno meant to professional wrestling. But Andre and Hogan. Hogan was a heel. Classy Freddie Blassie was his manager. And Hogan would continue to wrestle for, Vince Sr. Vince Sr. owned the company at this time. Now, Vince Jr., Vince McMahon, I'm going to form this company with Linda and take over the world, All right, but nevertheless, that Vince McMahon impression, I really should stop doing that because I'm not as young as I used to be. I'm half the energy I used to be. That doesn't make any sense. He continued, he started going to New Japan in 1980, and his first appearance was actually May 13th, 1980, and he would actually then compete at the Shea Stadium show. So him and Andre, and he was doing really well in Japan. He was getting a lot of attention. And to think that Hogan started when he did, Hiro Matsuda breaking his, ankle, or breaking his leg, whatever the hell he broke. And Hogan came back, and, he wrestled in Alabama and wrestled in Florida and stuff like that. So he was rising up pretty quickly. And Vince Sr. saw a lot in him. Vince Sr. did not want him to go film Rocky III. So he went to film Rocky III, and that basically led to Hogan becoming basically, like nothing. He meant nothing. Vince Sr.'s like, okay, Terry, you're fired. He would then go to the AWA in 1981, and then we go basically to the Bob Backlund portion of this whole thing. And I'm going to kind of bounce back and forth, Hogan, Backlund. I'm going to tell the story and everything, and then I'm going to, just summarize all this. But Bob Backlund was in the midst of his, nearly 6-year-long reign because he beat superstar Billy Graham for it on the 20th of February, 1978, and that was 10 months roughly after Billy Graham had won the championship from Bruno, which was really, really surprising to a lot of people. And Billy Graham, in hindsight, probably should have held the title a lot longer because he was drawing. But Billy Graham also was a self-destructive individual that had done God knows what to his body and ended up becoming kind of a piece of shit later in life. If Vince sent him a check, he was fine. And if he didn't, yeah. He was calling everybody the devil and everything because religion poisoned his mind, as it does a lot of people. But Bob Backlund, he even teamed with Pedro Morales to August 1980. So he was in the midst of like 2.5 years as champion by the time we got to the Shea Stadium show. He faced Hogan in a series of matches in 1980. And I mean, even though both those guys would go on to do bigger and better things, Backlund would continue to be champion for another just over 3 years, 3.25. Hogan would obviously rise up and become arguably one of the greatest of all time. At least one of the biggest draws of all time. And he faced other people throughout the territory. 1981, his reign continued. He even faced Greg Valentine. The disputed finish, they did that, and that was something that a lot of territories did, where even Greg was shown as the champion at some house shows. And also, he did face Antonio Inoki, Backlund did, and actually lost the championship for a little bit, but they didn't recognize that stuff till later. So, we then go to the Iron Sheik. And the Iron Sheik at this point had left he was wrestling in WWF in early 1980, but then he left and he'd feuded with Backlund, and that would come back to, cement. They would come back to cement that a little bit later on with Iron Sheik beating Bob Backlund. He faced Bruno, he faced Slaughter, and then he would go on to have an even better feud with Slaughter a little bit later on. In April of 1980, he would then go to Jim Crockett Promotions. A little bit later, he would be Hussein Arab. He would then become the Iron Sheik. Like, a lot of this gets kind of like lost in there, but he would become the Iron Sheik instead of Ali Vaziri. And, Hussein Arab. And Farouk something. I forget exactly all of it. Rest in peace, Sheiky. He played on the whole Iranian hostage situation in 1980, the hostage crisis, and he had no fear at all. He became NWA Mid-Atlantic champion and beat Jim Brunzell. A lot of people tend to forget that Jim Brunzell also had times where he was in other promotions because Vern Gagne wasn't paying all that well. And Brunzell was never going to be a, mainstay as a singles guy, but he threw a pretty good dropkick and was a pretty good tag team wrestler. But obviously Crockett saw something in him because Mid-Atlantic champion. And then he lost it to Steamboat, Sheik that is, to Steamboat in 1980 in a Falls Count Anywhere match. When Falls Count Anywhere matches actually meant something. He left in August of 81, so he would stay in places and earn respect, but he would also bounce around. He would, continue to wrestle, continue to do things. And as we go in a timeline of stuff, we're going to Hogan going to the AWA. And he was a heel at first. I believe Luscious Johnny Valiant was his guy. And then by the time we got to like, I think August or September, I think maybe September, he was already a face. I mean, there was no way. Like, the impossible to replicate physique and the charisma. For all Hogan's faults, believe me, I mean, I got a lot of shit to say about Hogan. Randy Savage is always better. Piper could have been just a great champion. Maybe not as long as Hogan. Hogan was the guy, but Hogan had a ton of charisma. A fuck ton of charisma. And he faced and beat Bockwinkel in April of 1982. But they had a disputed finish. I believe Bockwinkel introduced a foreign object, did all this stuff and whatever. It was all this crap. And Hogan's continuing to face Bockwinkel. And the crowds would continue to roar for Hogan. 14, 16,000 people. St. Paul Civic Center and other surrounding venues that would hold that many. Hogan was drawing big crowds. And that's not to say there weren't other talents there. There were plenty of other talents in the AWA at that point. But Hogan was a revelation. He was somebody that was launching and carrying that company. And Bockwinkel, all due respect to him, who's a tremendous world champion, classic world champion of all time, could have dropped the title if Vern had actually wanted to play ball, and it would have worked. But he was working in Japan as well, Bockwinkel and Hogan. He was continuing to work. He was continuing to make money, facing off against Inoki. The disputed finish they had sometime in 83, I believe. It was your spring or summer of 83. They were doing a lot of great shit. And during this time, since we're in 82, we go to Vince McMahon buying the WWF from his father with company profits. I believe it was $1 million over 4 quarterly installments. But he was using the company profits to pay it, and if he defaulted on one payment, that was it. Personally, I think the Vince Sr. wanted to get out of wrestling and just wanted to give his... he wanted to earn money for the partners, but Vince Sr. probably also sensed that his health was giving out, and I believe he died, excuse me, of some form of cancer sometime in I believe it's 84. It's a real shame he couldn't actually see his son's vision of WrestleMania. I mean, I wonder how Vince Sr. would have reacted to that. But he bought it from his dad in 1982. He began gobbling up TV markets from the AWA. He wanted to buy the AWA in summer of 83. He was getting more towns, arena exclusives. He was getting a lot of talent. So he was starting his expansion by the fall of 82, especially in mid-83. Snuka feuded with Backlund, who was still champion. And Backlund, by this point, just to go back to Backlund here real quick, was actually doing really, really well. And he was having great matches, faced Patterson, who, I still believe, had everything to do with the scandal in 1992, if you know what I'm talking about. But he faced Patterson. He was facing various people. Even faced superstar Billy Graham when Billy Graham came back. When he was Karate Billy Graham. Waha, everybody was superstar fighting. So, the Snuka matches, what got Snuka over with the fans was him doing these incredible feats of strength and his tremendous agility, hitting a splash, missing a splash off the top of the cage. And Snuka would become a face soon after. And then we get to basically 1983, where I'm just going to take a little side thing here and say that Vince McMahon still did not pay for pay karma-wise for paying off the cops that were investigating Snuka murdering Nancy Argentino. He did. And Snuka never faced repercussions for it. And the fact that he died not serving a day in jail because of that was ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. And he was still featured as the guy. You had Snuka and Don Morocco. So all this stuff's building in 83. You had AWA Super Sunday that was going on. That was April of 83. That was a few weeks before Snuka murdered Nancy Argentino. And they, it was a huge amount of money. I think it was like a couple $100,000. St. Paul Civic Center, closed circuited in a venue nearby, if not next door, nearby. And it was a raucous crowd. That St. Paul Civic Center. Take a look at old pictures and take a look at like just how the crowd engulfs you. It was a hell of a goddamn atmosphere. The crowd got to witness a show that wasn't the greatest AWA offering, but all they wanted to see was Hogan finally beat Bockwinkel. End his long reign, even though Otto Wanz had won the championship from Bockwinkel by paying Vern for just become the AWA champion. Hogan was the guy. And he got to celebrate by winning with his leg drop. But then they took it away from him because he threw Bockwinkel over the top. The crowd chanted with some of the loudest bullshit chants you will hear this side of any Attitude Era thing or this side of any ECW event. You did not hear that much, chain of bullshit from crowds, at least that were televised. It was a big fucking, really, really monstrously stupid move by Vern not to give Hogan the championship. Even if he had taken the title off of him in 6 months and Hogan had decided to leave, at least Vern would have had that, and then the fans wouldn't have lost faith. They lost faith in Vern, and even though, yes, 1984 had some business, and 1985 had some business, and they got to the Wrestle Rock Rumble, which was ridiculous. AWA Wrestle Rock and the Wrestle Rock Rumble rap deal thing, which Bockwinkel actually didn't sound too bad. Bockwinkel was at least approaching or at 50 at this point and could do stuff. And Vern Gagne couldn't book or rap. I don't think either of those are really surprising, but I definitely don't think the rap is surprising. But 1983, pivotal year. Vince pays off the guys, pays off the cops. Bockwinkel keeps the title. Hogan becomes more and more disenfranchised towards the AWA. And the AWA still had really record business going. But then they would cancel shows. They would boost tickets. They would boost ticket prices. People wanted to see title changes. They didn't see it. They didn't see that title change. They weren't seeing what they wanted to see. And you can only screw around the fans so many times. Can't give them everything they want all the time. But if you don't give them what they want at the moment that you should, you can't extend something like that. You could do it occasionally if you want to have a proper payoff. Vern Gagne never wanted to give him a payoff. And the idea that Greg Gagne said, the idea was for Hogan to win the title and then feud with Andre the Giant in a series of steel cage matches. No, he was, or maybe not steel cage matches, but he was going to feud with Bockwinkel in a series of steel cage matches. And that's when Hogan left. And then was going to feud with Andre over the championship. Except Andre already was getting, exclusivity, rights by Vince, or to Vince. He basically was going to become the guy. He was already cutting out a lot of outdates by the time we got to late 83, early 84. He would go to Mexico and Japan, but, Greg always wants to shield his dad, and bless him, but no. So, let's go to the rest of 1983. The Iron Sheik worked territories like Mid-South Florida, Georgia Championship Wrestling in the intervening years. Returned to WWF sometime in 83. And even at 41, he was positioned quickly as the top heel because Vince McMahon had made the deal sometime either in November or December. It's never been able to be nailed down when he made the deal with Hogan. And he made the deal with other people, Jesse Ventura, David Schultz, various other people were coming over. And Vince was like, okay, you guys hate Vern. I'll give you more money, more opportunity. And he did. He did. So he ended up injuring Backlund's arm and beating him up with the Persian Club Challenge thing that Sheik would do, which I could never do that. I don't care if I ever bulked up. There's no way I could do it because there's a technique to it. It's not just about strength. But he injured him at some kind of, I believe, house show or TV taping or something. and then beat him on the 26th of December 1983 when Arl Skolin threw in the towel. Thus ended Backlund's nearly 6-year reign. 6 years. He never lost it to Inoki. How dare you say that? And Backlund was still doing well as champion. He even feuded with Billy Graham. All stuff I talked about. Inoki in Japan. Snuka becoming a face pretty much killed Backlund because then he would get a crew cut, he would wear the singlet. He lost some mass, and he kind of become the howdy doody type guy. The problem is Vince didn't see the money in Backlund. He wanted to turn Backlund heel. Backlund at the time didn't want to turn heel, didn't want his kids to see that. Now I respect that. Now you see Mr. Backlund in 1994 and talking about the plebeians and Mr. Backlund wanting to become president and that stuff in 95 was great in hindsight. I remember hating it as a kid, but I remember finding him entertaining. Bob Backlund was a tremendous heel. And I mean, he wrestled on a TNA pay-per-view sometime in 2007 and could still go. That just shows how great Backlund was. And I mean, still is. I mean, he retired. My God, he's in his 70s now by this point. But you had Snuka Morocco, you had all this stuff going on in 83. Sheik beats Backlund. And Backlund did do house shows. Faced off against Sheik. And apologies, by the way, if my voice sounds a little bit rough. Weather changes and a bit of still getting over some the remnants of a cold. Don't worry, I'm good. But he faced off against Backlund, or Backlund faced off against Sheik and various other people, and Salvatore Balom, or Salvatore, I forget. Salvatore, that's a guy he faced before leaving in August of 84. One quick thing is that people tend to forget that Backlund actually did wrestle in the UWFI, or I believe UWF. It was one of the two. He wrestled in Japan. He was perfect for that style. Wrestled in the AWA. Backlund, stepped back a little bit. Stepped Backlund a little bit. Missed an opportunity there. But could always deliver in the ring. And he didn't just leave for almost 8 goddamn years. He kept busy. And then, Hogan left the AWA. Vern didn't give the Hogan the title. All the stuff was going on. Kept pissing off the fans. Hogan did his pre-tapes and set up to face Bockwinkel in a series of cage matches. Vince said, Hogan, return, I will make you my guy. And he did. He was endorsed by Backlund, and I don't know if Backlund necessarily hated Hogan as a person, but I would not be surprised if he wasn't necessarily the happiest that he was, seen as the guy. But Backlund, and he worked hard. Backlund worked really hard. Still stays in great shape from what I understand. And what a character. What a fucking character. But Iron Sheik defended against Tito Santana and other people. He only held the championship for just under a month. Like, it was just under that. And then in Madison Square Garden, the Hallowed Halls of Madison Square Garden, we had the Iron Sheik against Hulk Hogan. And we had, big. It was maybe 6-7 minutes or whatever. It was a big old deal. And Sheik would get some steam on him. Hogan would come back. He would roar back. And eventually hit the patented leg drop. 1, 2, 3. Hulkamania is here in the WWF. Mean Gene, it's a dream of a lifetime, Daddy. Gets the champagne poured over him by Andre. Ivan Putski's there. I mean, Andre showed up first because Andre was the guy to help anoint Hogan even more. And all this stuff's going on. And Hogan would continue to reign as champion. And the whole idea is leading up to all that. Vince McMahon could have had somebody else step in and be the guy. He couldn't have relied on Snuka because by that point, even though Snuka and Piper would have their legendary feud, Snuka would have unraveled. Slaughter could have been it, but Slaughter would have taken them high, but he wouldn't have taken them as high as Hogan. Because Hogan was cartoonish, but cartoonish in the best way possible, and exactly the type of guy that Vince McMahon wanted to present. That's basically it right there. Hogan would become the champion, and January 23rd, 1984, pivotal, gigantic, monumental day in professional wrestling, especially for the WWF. And it would lead to superstardom for many, many people. Okay, sure. I mean, there are people that got screwed over on payoffs and people that got promised stuff that didn't get delivered. But Vince McMahon had a lot of licensing stuff, and a lot of people made a lot of money. Whether they saved it or not was their business. Sure, they had to travel a lot. And there's a debate going on now as of this recording. Hogan's long reign and Roman Reigns' long reign and the title defense discrepancy. Different time when Hogan presented it. Was presented as champion. He was defending the title at house shows. He was defending the title on TV specials, on the pay-per-views as they were going. Roman Reigns, seen more as an attraction. Yes, you could argue that the title reign doesn't mean as much. Different time period. If Roman worked as much as Hogan, it would get stale because of the television production. Because of the house show stuff and how television was produced back then and how big shows meant something, Hogan's title reign meant more because you saw it on occasion. You saw him as champion. When you saw him defend it, it was special. Roman, when you see him defended, it's special. And sure, I'm as tired of it as anybody else, but it's also a completely different time period. I mean, we are coming up on 40 years since Hulkamania was born in the WWF. Guys, things change, things evolve, some for the better, some for the worse. The bottom line is, both title reigns can mean, things in a positive and negative way. You just have to look at it with different eyes. You have to look at how things were back in 84 and 84 through 88 and how things were back in 20. Let's never go back to 2020 again for a variety of reasons. But Roman Reigns' title reign has been going on for just over 3 years at this point. We'll likely go to at least WrestleMania. I'd be very surprised if it ended at the Rumble. I think it would almost be stupid just because of what they put into it. But the bottom line is Hulk Hogan, Hulkamania helped launch WWF into the stratosphere. It was a big goddamn deal. And even though Hogan, can be picked on for a lot of the shit that he says and a lot of shit he has done and a lot of the stuff that he has continued to perpetuate lies about, you can't take away the fact that Hulk Hogan meant a whole lot and it was a big deal when he won the championship. So, agree, disagree, what I said, like, share, subscribe, Twitter handle in the description. I'm John Retlin. I'll see you soon.